and welcome to another episode of Sockseye School, where today I'm going to be talking about distribution in psychology, which tends to be an area of the course that students don't feel too confident with, even though it's relatively straightforward. And I think the reason why it comes with confusion is it deals with concepts like standard deviation and graphs, which some people just get and other people don't. As you can see, according to the specification, the key areas that you need to know are distribution in relation to what a normal distribution is, skewed distribution, and then how you would recognise what a normal and a skewed distribution are. The exam questions that you can be asked are not too scary for this area. So we're going to talk you through the different types of distribution and then show you some exam questions so you feel a bit more confident in this area. Normally in psychology, we don't tend to have a representative sample because gaining a sample that's representative is really hard, and often research you don't want a representative sample for whatever reason, or it's really hard to gain one. But assuming you did have a representative sample, that is a sample that fully represents your target population, you would expect when using something like gaining the understanding of height that it should be normally distributed. And what that means is that most people are of average height, and by the average we're talking about the mean, and then you've got some people who are very short and some people who are very tall, but most people fall within 1 or 2 standard deviations of the mean. And that's how you end up getting that graph that looks like a bell curve, where you have the mean, median, mode all in the same place. Then 50% of your scores are less than the mean, median and mode, and 50% are greater. Let's talk about that in a little bit more detail, because that word standard deviation tends to throw people. Essentially, standard deviation measures how much the scores deviate from the mean. Okay, and it's a useful measure because it tells us how spread out your scores are. If your scores are not spread out, it means they're quite consistent. If your scores are very spread out, it means you've got a wide spread of scores and that they're not consistent. So in relation to this bell graph, where you've got the mean, median, mode in the same place, you see that within 1 standard deviation of the mean, you've got a majority of your scores, so around 68% of your scores there. And then within 2 standard deviations, you've got nearly all of your scores, with only small amounts of your scores falling within 3 standard deviations. Now, if you have a low standard deviation, it means that the scores are very close together, whereas a high standard deviation shows that the scores are spread out. And in lesson, I'll have taught you this little dance where you've got a low standard deviation where the scores are close together, high standard deviation, your scores are spread out. Now, to understand standard deviation, you kind of need to have a look at the lesson on standard deviation and range to help you. But really, it's just important that you've got an idea of what a standard deviation is showing when we're looking at spread and when we're looking at distribution. So if this bothers you, if this doesn't quite sit right with you, go back to the video on the measures of central tendency and measures of spread, just to give you a little bit more clarity on that area. If you don't have a representative sample, which in psychology is quite likely, you'll probably get a skewed distribution where the spread isn't symmetrical like we see in the bell curve, and instead it'll be either skewed to the left or the right, and we refer to this as being positively or negatively skewed. So I'm just going to zoom in on that diagram. If you have data that has a positive skew, what that means is that the long tail of the graph, so you can see there's a bar chart behind that graph, the long tail is on the positive side. And what that means is that it's skewed to the right. Your data, the majority of your scores are to the right. And in that, it means that your mean is to the right of your mode. The mean is to the right of your mode. So you can see here, there's your mean, but your mode is there. So the mean is to the right of your mode. In a negative skew, as you can see the bar chart there, it's the opposite. The long tail is on the negative side. It's been skewed to the left. And that means that your mean is to the left of your mode. So whilst most of your scores are here, your average score is not quite in the same place. And that creates a negative skew. Really, all you have to know for psychology A-level is what a positive skew looks like and what the characteristics are, i.e. the mean is to the right of the mode. In addition, you also need to know how to sketch one of these. But it should be relatively straightforward. Once you've learned what a positive skew looks like and what a negative skew looks like, as well as what a normal distribution looks like, which is the bell curve, this should be relatively straightforward. Let's look at a classic exam question. You have a bar chart here, and it says identify the type of skew shown in this graph and explain your answer. Pause the video and write your answer. Okay, I hope that what you did before you wrote your answer for this is just have a quick flick back to this and think, is that graph more reflective of the positive skew, the negative skew, or the normal distribution? Well, I can see from looking at that it's not a normally distributed graph, and if I look back at that section there that's talking about positive skew and negative skew, I can see that the long tail of my graph here is on the negative side. It's skewed to the left. I can see that there. It's been skewed to the left. And what I can see is that it appears that my mean is on the left of my mode. So here's my mode, here's my mean. And what that tells me then is that I have a negative skew. So how I answer this question is this graph has a negative skew in which I get 1 mark for, because the mean is to the left of the mode, mean to the left of the mode, instead of being normally distributed. And then I get a 2nd mark there. That's a very basic exam question. Let's have a look at a slightly more complicated one. And this initially will look confusing, but it's not too bad. So pause the video, have a read of the exam question, and we'll talk through your answer once you've had a go answering it. This question gives you a scenario in relation to schizophrenia, so we know this is a paper 3 question, which just demonstrates the fact that research methods will come up anywhere. But what you can see is you've got scores in group A, 22.4, 22.5, 22. Something should be sticking in your head there as you're looking at those scores. And then you've got group B, where you've got the mean at 26, the median at 22.5, and the mode at 16. Now looking at that data, I can see for group A, the mean, median, mode are basically in the same place. Whereas for group B, that's not the case. And I know that I've got my mean at 26, my median at 22, and my mode at 16. So if I flick back to this image about positive and negative skew, in a negative skew, the mean is on the left of the mode. In a positive skew, the mean is to the right of the mode. So if I was to draw this as a diagram, I've got my mean at 26 and I've got my mode at 16. Pause the video again and see if that helps you at all. There are 4 marks available for this question, and your first mark comes from identifying that Group A's scores indicate a normal distribution. And you explain that by saying that 22, 22, 22, pretty much the mean, median, mode are all in the same place. And we know that that then leads to a normal distribution bell graph. So you get 1 mark for saying that it's a normal distribution for Group A, and the 2nd mark comes from explaining that. So in Group A, the mean, median, mode are almost in the same place as in a bell-shaped curve, something along those lines. Now in Group B, it's a positively skewed distribution. And the reason for that is that your mean is higher than your median and your mode, or to the right-hand side. So when we look at a positive skew, we know that the mean is to the right, it's higher, it's to the right of your mode. And that's what we see. If the mode is 16 and the mean is 26, that's what we would expect. So you get your marks there for saying that Group B indicates a positive distribution, positive skew distribution, sorry. The mean is higher than the median, correct, and the mode, correct, which indicates that there is a right-hand skew to the distribution, positive skew. Let's have a look at this question. Now, this question's a lot more difficult and it makes you think outside the box, okay? Psychologists devised a memory test and tested 200 participants. The results are shown in the distribution graph. So we can see we've got a negative skew here because we've got our mode is here. So the mean is to the left of the mode, which is why we've got this negative skew seen here. And the question asks you, psychologists decides to modify the memory test so that it will produce a more normal distribution. Briefly explain how they might achieve this. Have a think, pause the video, see what you think. We'll come back in a second. Right. Now we want our mode and our median to be the same as the mean, to be the same as the average. We can see that most people got quite a high score, which is why we've ended up getting this negative skew. So most people got a high score. So in order to produce a normal distribution, we want everybody to be getting the same score, really. In order to do that, if most people got a higher score, we want to make the test a bit harder, because that's going to be the way that you're going to then end up getting your scores in the middle. Now, thinking about that can be quite difficult and might throw you in the exam. But if that is stressing you out, all you have to do is think back to, I want the mean, median, mode in the same place to get a normal distribution. How am I going to do that? So as you can see here, in order to get the marks for this question, you need to adjust the difficulty of the test to make it harder, so fewer people get a high mark. Most people get a median mark, so people will get an average mark that will achieve a normal distribution. And if you then draw a diagram and normal distribution to indicate that, that is fine in that question. Again, we've got another question here. Pause the video, have a read of the question. So there are two parts of this question. It's asking you to sketch a graph of the distribution curve and then talk about what the distribution of your graph shows. So you've got the median at 95, you've got the mean at 8.6, you've got the mode at 13. So your graph will end up looking something a little bit like this. It's a rough sketch, but you've got a number of participants, the investment score, you've got the mean here as the lowest figure, the median here in the mode. So looking at that, you can see that that is a negative skew because your mean is to the left of your mode. And that gives you a negative skew. So you get 3 marks for that part of the question by you've correctly drawn this diagram and you've correctly plotted where the mean, median, mode is. It doesn't matter about it being super accurate, but you can see that it gives a negative skew. You then get the second mark for identifying that it is a negative skew. I hope that's cleared up some questions that you've got about distributions in psychology. If there are any more questions, first of all, read the textbook, see if there are any other YouTube videos out there talking you through it. But what I don't want to happen is that you freak out, you see a diagram with lots of numbers and you're like, I can't answer that. Just take a breath, and actually the distribution questions are not too stressful. Thanks for watching, guys. Low standard deviation, scores close together. High standard deviation, scores spread out. Low standard deviation, scores close together. High standard deviation, scores spread out. Simples.